Welcome to Inside Photo Organizing, from DIY to Pro. I am Allison Friedman from Arrange Wander Focus of Chicago, Illinois.
I am Susan Wallach from Save a Memory of Northern Colorado. This podcast focuses on preserving memories and stories through our photos and videos.
Together, we will provide photo organizing tips and tricks for everyone from the person who wants to do it yourself to other pros in our industry. We will also bring you the latest software and hardware for photo and digital asset management. We're passionate about helping you turn disorganized memories into stories you can cherish and share.
We will be answering your questions, and we hope that as you learn more, you can complete your own storytelling and photo organizing project and feel more confident to finally know that you can preserve and find those special memories with ease. Join us on this journey of learning how to preserve the memories that matter. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Susan. How are you? I'm
I,
good. I'm still cold. I've got like the extra sweater on. I feel like a broken record because the last few of these I get on and I'm like, I'm cold. But you know what? It's 8 degrees out today. So I've got some extra clothing on, but all is good. All is good. How are you?
Good. I'm got my little uh flannel going here as well. Actually, we're supposed to have some nice weather, even though like right now it's like 27 out. This week is still supposed to be relatively warm. Next week they're predicting polar vortex to come down from the north,
Yeah.
and we could have below zero temperatures for a week or close to zero. So yeah, not looking forward to next week, but this week is still good. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Ooh,
had a little
we're probably,
disaster.
uh-oh, a disaster. What is your
Well, my
disaster?
kitty, she's probably about 4 months, maybe 5 months now. And I'm in the living room watching TV or something, and I hear something fall over. I'm like, oh no. And turned out she tried to jump on one of my potted plants. It's on a stand. So the whole thing tipped over, dirt and everything, down into the vent, the heating vents on the floor and stuff. So yeah, so she's been relegated to the bedroom again while I'm not able to keep my eye on her. So
Yeah. Not really a disaster compared
no.
to some other things that are happening, but
Oh,
I,
yes, that's true.
it,
In the
it
home,
just
though,
in the home,
everything is
yeah.
relative. Yeah.
It's always relative. I was thinking about the weather comment, and I was thinking this morning, I have this problem every single day. So I get up early, as everybody by now but knows by now. But one of the things I do early morning, pretty much every day, is walk the dog, obviously. And when it's this cold and there's snow, people put way so much salt down. So much salt. And it doesn't even matter if it's dog friendly salt. So this morning I decided, all right, I'm going to try putting those stupid booties on the dog. I don't know if this is everywhere, but it's a Chicago thing. People put these boots on their dog because of all the salt, and he has
Yes.
never, ever, ever let me. And I got 1 foot on today, one, just one. So I figured, all right, well, one's better than nothing, and we go out for our walk. And within like literally 2 minutes, the booty is gone, and about a half hour later, his little paws are up, saying, "Mommy, clean my paws off because they hurt." And oh, I just can't wait for this to be over. I actually don't mind the cold. I love the snow. None of that bothers me. The only thing that bothers me about this is having to walk my poor dog. And I've got him mostly trained to walk in the snow, but the stupid booties. Which actually brings me to one of the questions I actually had for you, Susan. Recently we interviewed Sky Bergman. Love
Yes.
that episode. So that was in January, or the episode
Loved
aired
it.
in
It
January.
was such a good episode.
Yeah, it was great on legacy. And I was actually thinking this morning while walking the pup that I have just almost as many photos of my dog, who's 7, as I do of my children. And now that both of my kids are in college, I take more photos of my dog than I do of my children. And I was wondering, I know that you are also very attached to your pets. And I'm wondering, when you think about legacy,
Hmm.
do you include your pets?
Well, I will tell you that I have a pet guardianship in my will. So it has been identified, a person in my family as the person to take care of my animals upon my death.
Yeah.
And of course, that's important to me. And then I I take a ton of photos and videos as well. I have never done a book per se, a photo book just on my animals, although I have
Mhm.
considered it. I know in our group, Lisa Deneau is, um, really well known for her uh, dog or animal books because it's not always about dogs. It could be about cats
Yeah.
and bunnies and everything. But I don't know if I could create one with all the little stories that are about them because almost as if, talking about family legacy, it's like those story once they've gone, those stories are gone. Like their little
Yeah.
personalities, I still remember them, but could I describe them as well as I could describe my current animals? And so, that's
Yeah.
something really good to think about is what do what kind of legacy do you want to have? Um, and I know I do want to create a book just with some really nice photos that capture their personality. How McKenna used to love to play. I foster animals through different animal rescues, so that they can get some care and protection before they get adopted. And so, whenever I brought in a new foster, McKenna was always the first one to just welcome them into the home and try and get them to play and everything. And so I do remember that and some of the other quirkiness about my previous cats and stuff. But yeah, now that you think about it or say it, I probably should start, gathering them. I do ID them, facial ID in my programs.
Yeah.
So whenever they come up and it says, well, which animal is this? I try and ID it. So I do that.
Yeah, it's interesting not to put more on people's plates who are starting to think about documenting legacy, but don't forget your pets. I think
Yeah.
our dog is absolutely the most important member of our family. If you ask either of my children, they will say that for
Yeah.
sure. So one more thing, and I was just thinking about it because as it so happens, we did not plan to do a two-part legacy podcast, but I feel like that's what's happening now. Our guest today is somebody that we reached out to, I don't know, a few months ago, and asked him to come on. And uh, it just worked out so strangely. I don't really know how to describe it. We had Sky Bergman here in January, and our next guest, we're also going to talk about legacy in a different way. He has some different things to share with us, but the strange part of this is that he is in LA and has been dealing with the fires and things in LA firsthand, and has an expertise in legacy and story preservation. And so, just those two things layered upon each other, I was also thinking this morning that we essentially did create a two part
Series.
podcast series
Yep.
on legacy, kind of accidentally. We should
Well, they
be,
they do build upon each other. And the
yeah,
information that Sky shared with us was so fun and entertaining and I and motivational, just to, encourage people to get your phone and put it on a tripod and start, talking to your relatives and capturing those stories. Well, this episode I think is going to take your that development of curating and gathering your photos and your stories on your family to a whole new level.
I think it will too.
Yeah, he
I think it
he's
will
got
too.
some fantastic training that I just told him before we're getting ready to air that sometimes it can be overwhelming even for us. And
Yeah.
how do you swallow this legacy elephant? And of course you do it one bite at a time. So let's bring on our guest, Peter.
Yes. Welcome, Peter from LA. And please, if you could introduce yourself, and also, we're not going to dwell too much on the fires today, but they are impacting everybody and certainly you. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are and what you've dealt with in the last little bit. And, maybe how, but during our discussion, maybe we can talk a little bit about how that's maybe changing your viewpoint a little bit or strengthening it or, affecting it in some way.
Well, thank you. Good morning, Allison, and good morning, Susan. And thank you for having me. And, I was listening to the introduction. I was almost starting to get a little moved myself just because sometimes you forget the context of like what's going on. And, this week has been pretty rough for so many people that I care about. And we had one pretty rough night as I was explaining earlier. It's kind of a hurricane instead of rain. It was fire, and it's unlike anything I've ever really experienced. And we can kind of go into that in a minute. But um, I was born and bred in New York City, and grew up around photography. My grandfather was a studio photographer out in Brighton Beach along the Coney Island boardwalk. So there was always, I was in the studio as soon as I could stand, having my picture taken. Um, and my father was an amateur photographer and professional cinematographer and film editor. So both sides of my family, I was just inundated with family photos. I became a photographer. Surprise, surprise. And, I had a studio in New York for a number of years, which was great. Had advertising and magazine clients, and then I migrated over to stock photography, and I started a stock agency, and it was all digital from the beginning, and that's where I really learned to kind of work and deal with large numbers of digital images. And I was pretty adept at working with Photoshop from the very beginning. And I used to train people on Photoshop and Quark. And so I was tech savvy and had this agency. And it was the best job I ever had. And then things changed. And I started to see that there was going to be a need on a personal level for the kind of organizational necessities that professionals had always had, but now is going to need to be on the more family and personal photo. So I was like, this is something I want to do, and then I found our organization, and I was like, whoa, there's other people doing it. We call ourselves the photo managers, and it's wonderful because we kind of talk and exchange ideas and educate each other and really have pushed the boundaries of a field that had not really been, explored before. And so we're really on the forefront of a lot of stuff, and it's really, I think, exciting to kind of be in that position and for us to be able to kind of do this. And in this particular circumstance, to talk about legacy and preservation, it couldn't be more timely and personal. So yeah, thanks.
Oh, I can't agree with you more. And I'm blown away with your background and your history and your knowledge that you share has always been so uh extraordinary in the detail, almost to overwhelmment, as I was mentioning before, the legacy training that you provide. And so how during our conversations today, we don't want to overwhelm our listening audience. We want to light their fire, so to speak. Ooh. Um, we
Interesting
want
choice
to
of words today, Susan.
yeah. But we want to, get that spark going, that, the creative in us, where it's not, you don't do it because the time is ticking. You don't, you don't do it like a lot of times things are created during memorials, right? And so we want to flip that around. We want to have you proactively do it so that the people who are in your life now can enjoy it, right? And so, um, one of the things I do want to let our listening audience know, that if you are just joining us for this episode and you haven't heard any of our others, we do talk about this topic in software and apps that we recommend that can help you on this journey. So besides Sky's wonderful documentary that kind of showed a prime example of what you could do by, capturing other people's stories, we also have Artifacts. We talked about that app, and that can quickly, take a photo and you can talk about some object in your home. And then there's Trustworthy for backing up your documents. We talked about that with the creator. Allison, was there another poignant one that, so we talked about that?
Yeah, I know it's sprinkled
Yeah,
in others, but I think those are the big ones. And we should have looked this up, but I'm pretty sure that Heather Nickerson and Artifacts was January of last year, 2024. Nat from Trustworthy, I think was November of last year. I'm pretty sure. And then just so people can find these more easily. And Sky Bergman was January of this year.
yeah.
And all of them deal with preserving stories in different ways and preserving your things and your documents and things that are important to you in different ways. And with Peter today, we'd love for you to delve a little bit more into, why this is important, how you got started. And really, I actually want to start with, we throw around this word legacy a lot. It can mean a lot of different things. So, what does it mean to you, and what does it mean in the context of our discussion today?
Okay. Yeah, when I did the course that I created, I had to look up the word. I wanted to kind of have a kind of a broader sense of what it meant. Something that is part of your history or that remains from an earlier time, something transmitted or received from an ancestor or predecessor or from the past, and something that is passed on. And kind of where it took me, and you mentioned the word context. If you were to put legacy in context, I would say that, we are exactly at the point between our past and our future, our ancestors and our descendants. So then the question is, what is our responsibility? Right now, we are kind of the shepherds of our legacy and our family's legacy. And how do we kind of approach that? And, for years I worked as a photo organizer. And quite often, as we all know, when you get a client, initially there may be a great deal of anxiety on their part. In other words, they're coming from a place of like, I'm overwhelmed, I'm afraid of losing things, I want to get things organized, I want to get rid of stuff. And so one of the jobs I felt early on when dealing with that client is to kind of turn around their way of looking at it, set their expectations. So less of a cleaning out the garage type of project and more of like, hey, we're going to create something here. We're going to have fun. This is going to be a project that is going to be enthusiastic. It's not about getting rid of stuff. It's about finding stuff. And we'll talk about the curation process. So, when people are looking for things, they're going to be way more enthusiastic than they are when they're getting rid of things, right? So I realized a lot of this work is about helping our clients and helping everyone understand that legacy work is a creative process and it's an important process. And when we can kind of plug into the motivations that make it enjoyable and fun and interesting, then it really becomes a very different type of process. And so that's what I try to do.
I
Nice.
love the idea of, and I've talked about with clients many times, of looking for the keepers versus marking or deleting the
Yeah.
other stuff. And for me, where that comes up most often, I am an amateur, very amateur wildlife photographer. So I go out and I shoot, if I'm trying to capture birds, for example, in flight, I'm going to shoot 500 photos or something. But what I do is when I get back, I put them all on the screen and I just look through and find, usually it's five or, not a very large number of the ones that I want to keep. And it doesn't mean like I don't have to really go through them one by one.
Yeah,
It's finding the ones, finding the things that tell your story and the things that you want to keep, and the rest is sort of less important,
yeah,
easier.
once you find the keepers, it's really easy to get rid of the stuff you don't want, right? Because you have
Hmm.
that, oh, I got what I want. And when I ran my photo agency and as a professional photographer, photo editing was an intrinsic part of the process. And you never looked what to get rid of first. You always looked for the stuff you wanted to keep. So you're exactly right. And if you find five great ones out of all that, you're in good shape. Most people don't realize that when you shoot, you're really going to get one or two really great ones.
Yeah.
So why have any other expectation when it comes to your personal photos as well?
So as I was re-listening to your training, as I progress through the legacy training, so I can get certified with the association, I heard you say that you sort of this got started for you just merely by posting some favorite photos on your social media, and I thought first it was kind of because we also talk about privacy. So I had sort of a cringe moment there because you don't want to give out too much about your family history, but I do remember you sharing some absolutely lovely stories and photos about family. Is that how you you know uh, is that how you dove into
Yeah.
even further learning about your family?
Well, it started when I started to scan my old family photos. And
Okay.
I am really blessed to have some really interesting stories on both sides of my family. They were both refugees sides, and I also, as I mentioned, I had a lot of photos. So I started to scan these photos and then wanted to kind of tell little brief stories about them. And some of the stories really, I'll tell a funny story in a second about it, but they have historical context in some regards. And so it wasn't like I was kind of, exposing family secrets or anything.
Oh, good.
This was, yeah, it was interesting from a historical perspective. um, and so I started posting it on my website, and I called it my legacy project. And I started posting those, sharing them on social media, and the responses were great. And I realized people enjoy stories, and so that's kind of what tied the whole like photos with stories to me. And when you do that, people are interested. That's how we pass on. If you think about, history has always just been passing down stories. And so that's really what I was doing. My grandfather had a Wikipedia page. He has one. And I was reading it one day and I was like, that sounds really familiar. And then I was reading a little more and I'm like, that sounds like really familiar. And then I read more and I'm like, wait a minute, this is like really, really familiar. And I get to the bottom and I realized that they had sourced my legacy project blog posts as his history. And I'm like, oh my God, if this is how history is told, we're in trouble. I realized like I should not be a source for this. These are family stories that I was writing about, and now it becomes kind of ingrained in history. So that was a real interesting experience for me to kind of understand that when we read history, it may or may not be accurate. It's that's the world we live in. But it
It's
was
the
an interesting
stories that
kind
are
of story.
told around the dinner table, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was full circle. So yeah,
Well, that's awesome. As a little side note, it goes right to the don't forget that anything you post anywhere
yeah,
Is
on the
published.
web is no longer yours. And, whether it's Wikipedia or AI bots or some random person somewhere
Yeah.
else, be a little
yeah.
bit wary about what you're posting there. But that is really funny. I don't think anybody in my family has a Wikipedia page. Well, I take that back. My husband's uncle, who was shot down in World War II and was a prisoner of war, he has a Wikipedia page. But nobody in my family rises to that. I don't know what that is, that upper echelon of Wikipedia famousness,
Yeah,
if
it's
that's a thing.
his mother was very famous in Germany, and he had a girlfriend who was very famous, and a woman named Rosa Luxemburg, and part of German history and so forth. So there was some historical interest, and I guess that's why we got his page. So
Interesting. So you said that actually where things started was when you began to digitize your old family photos, and then you talked about them, and that sparked the interest to just keep telling the stories. And then how did you figure out where that was going to lead?
I think it was just a process. I was looking for ways to kind of uh, send the message out to talk to people, and then I got the idea. I forget where to create the course, but I had already been talking to my clients because I could see the responses. Just as I was saying before, when I talked to them about legacy preservation as opposed to just simply organizing their photos, they kind of lit up. And so, I was getting evidence as I was going through this that this was something people were interested in, from, the responses to the stories, and from clients kind of being excited about doing it for their own family. So, the course was kind of the natural extension, and now I'm doing a variety of different things around that. And I'm also a photography teacher, so I've been an instructor for 15 years, and I enjoy teaching, and I enjoy kind of helping people, and so it all just kind of organically started to kind of coalesce, and now it's personal as well, the immediacy of it. So, but when I was packing up, uh, the stuff to evacuate. We didn't evacuate, but we had to be ready, and making those decisions about what to take. I realized, over 90% of the photos, family photos I have, had been digitized. And so I didn't worry. It was wonderful. I packed a hard drive. I had some negatives of my father's that I hadn't had a chance to scan yet. But other than that, I knew everything is in the cloud on hard drives, and fully protected and fully redundant. So that was a good feeling.
So how does your personal photo collection differ from what you consider your legacy collection? Is there a difference in that?
Yeah, and this brings up kind of another, I don't want to say inspiration, but reason for why I got to this. So again, going back to the fact that, we're photo organizers, we talk constantly about watching our clients, collections just grow larger and larger and larger. And I started to think that the answer was not to keep editing and culling it down. It was almost like a dog chasing its tail. But that, more importantly, the maybe the right way to do this was to extract, as Allison, as you said, the keepers, and create what I decided to call a legacy collection. So the photos that we amass, whether they're in Apple Photos or Lightroom or Amazon or whatever, those are libraries that we have, and for ourselves. I realized no one is going to want this. If I
Right.
told my son, "Here's 50,000 digital photos, it's all yours," he would laugh and walk into the other room. So that was not going to be. In other words, these catalogs we had were nothing related to legacy. They were for us. Like if you have a library, you go to it, you get stuff to do things with, and it will last my lifetime to have this library. Excuse me, but it wasn't anything that I was going to be able to pass on. So if I could extract from that, curate, cull out the keepers, and create a separate legacy collection that I then was much more archivable and manageable, and more importantly, that people would be interested in, then that was really the direction I wanted to go in. So it was, yeah, you can organize your Apple Photo Lab. That's terrific. Do it, but it's not the answer. what the answer is to extract from it, to identify. And the more I did that, the more I realized we're not talking about a few thousand. We're talking about maybe a few hundred, maybe even a few dozen. And I started to think, like growing up in my home, when I'd look around, my mother's had the photos stuck in a cork board. So all these wonderful photos have little pinholes in them, but or on the shelves or in the albums. And those images that I had a kind of an emotional connection to were the ones that's told my story. And taking 50,000 photos doesn't tell a story. It really doesn't. It's actually contrary to that because it just overwhelms. So by identifying that much smaller group, curating it, and turning it into story kind of formats, which I can talk about, it was going to be something that was going to be interesting to people because you could you could relate history to it. In other words, when you archive something, we know that you have to kind of identify it, right? We've all had those photos from our family photo collections. Who's that person? Where's that? Where's this? If you archive something, you have to have the ability to identify it. If you have 50,000 photos, forget about it, right? But if you have a few dozen or a few hundred, you can take the time to properly identify and create it family, timelines and family trees, and it all kind of comes together as something that is historical and informative and understandable. And so
Yeah.
less is definitely more, if that makes sense.
Well, I
I
think in
did.
your training, you mentioned something about 10 to 30 pictures per year or per person, something along those
Per
lines. So you're
year. Yeah.
per year. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's just a number I threw out.
but just so so we're kind of getting in a little bit into the detail, but just so you know that we're not talking about saving thousands of pictures every year on some, collection site. We're
Yeah.
really talking about drilling down to your top,
Yeah.
5-star picks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think though that there's a couple subsets though. And we're gonna end up focusing on the path that you guys that we've already started on here. But something you said, a little bit ago, you said something about, your kids aren't gonna want your 50,000 photos, which is true. In my personal collection, I know nobody wants my 50,000 photos of birds. I get that. It upsets me, but I get it. But I do think there are different types of collections that maybe don't fall exactly under legacy, but that people want. And so my example for my own family is both my kids are in college and they want our travel photos. They don't want the rest of it yet. And I don't know if they ever will, but they absolutely want the collection of the trips that we've gone on as a family. I don't know that that falls exactly under this legacy area, but I just don't want people to think that, we're essentially saying those 50,000 photos, those 20,000 photos you have in your camera roll are useless. Nobody needs them. Nobody wants them. That's not true. One,
No.
they're your collection, they're your life. And I'm assuming if you took them, you get enjoyment out of them. Could they be cleaned out? Probably, but still. But there are other groups of those photos. So for us, it's our travel photos are part, I don't know if you would call that part of our legacy. It's certainly more than 10 or 20 or 30. It's a whole lot more than that. But it's something that the kids really want. And one last example, and then we'll move on, is my son is currently taking a course on environmental storytelling, which is timely and interesting with all of our legacy discussion. And as part of this course, he's in Disney World learning how they how they do all the back end stuff and tell their stories and create their scenes and such. But my point is that he asked me, "Hey mom, when were we in Disney before?" And I said, "Well, you guys were in Disneyland when you were quite young. And here are those photos. There's not a ton of them because they were quite young, but he got huge enjoyment out of seeing that and tying it to where he is now. So I just don't want to lose the different subsets as we go on and talk more about legacy in the sense of what you're talking about, which is family history. But there are other subsets of
Yeah.
legacy that need to be preserved as well.
But the
I
whole idea of curating down to a select few images is still relevant, even if you're talking about travel, because you
Oh
can
yeah.
only put so many photos in a photo book. You can
Oh,
only
exactly.
put
Yes.
so many photos in a slideshow before your family's falling over,
Yes.
going enough.
Yes. I just didn't want to lose sight of the
Yeah,
fact that
no,
there
Yeah.
are different subject matters, I guess.
absolutely. And I'm so glad you did because, I keep evolving with my own takes on this. Um, I'll get back to the legacy collection in a minute, but to your point, Allison, I think my son uh, is going to want pictures, like you just said, with your children because they're his life, and so where you can approach it from that point is having discussion, just like you did, and that library that I have, as I said, you go to it to get things you want to do things with. That would include, you know, finding the pictures and the stories and the events and the experiences with your immediate family and your children. And I think that's really important. So that's a separate and apart thing that I literally was just thinking about this week, that like I'm going to put together some movie collages of, my son, because he's going to want to see that. He's going to want to see still. So I'm going to put something for him specifically that may not be part of that legacy collection. And the legacy collection, to kind of get back to that, is as you say, it's kind of a family history. In other words, I have family who's kind of protected some of the history we have by having photos, creating family trees. And so it's kind of my responsibility to kind of carry that forward. So I was, looking at it, and it's like, there's a few pictures of this person, a few pictures of this person. Why do I get to have 50,000 photos, right? Like, no, it's like this is a humbling kind of experience because you realize you're just a cog, an equal cog, unless you're kind of have a very interesting life that would, maybe necessitate more information and photos. I ask myself, how many pictures of my great great grandparents do I want? Well, that's going to be me. So how many pictures are they going to want of me in the future, right? So if like they're going to go like, why does this dude get so many pictures? Who is he? Well, he just happened to be part of the digital chain, and so like yeah, he took more pictures, well that doesn't mean he's more important. So I think there's a kind of a right sizeness that we need to approach it from.
Hmm.
And of course, we're probably going to have more pictures because we just do take more pictures. But there is that kind of sense of humility, I think, that is required to approach this. But again, what my son's going to get is going to be the legacy collection and the history, and I'll talk about my plans for that, but also something very specific to him because he deserves that, and it's more personal, and then he can decide what he wants to do with that, with his kids and so on and so
Yeah.
forth.
I used
Well,
to
I
think
think
it
you,
was harder to do the older family members, looking back, just because there isn't. I know for my family, we have almost nothing. And I used to think, well, that's so, that's the hard part is because we don't have much. But I actually think the harder part is when we try and curate our generation to add to that legacy, because we now have cameras in our pocket all the time and take pictures of literally everything instead of each individual picture has less importance because there's so many of them.
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
and I think you started on an interesting statement in that people sometimes don't think they're important enough in their
that's
cog
it.
of,
Yeah,
the chain of their family to even report any stories about themselves when you should actually think about you know, how fascinating everybody is in your family. And you don't know how in the future you will be looked upon. And you have the ability to kind of state the what is, what you felt was important in your contributions in your life.
yeah,
So, standing up and saying, yes, I matter and I should have a voice in this is sometimes one of the first hurdles that people
yeah.
have to get over, right?
I will, have an interesting kind of perspective on that. As a photographer, I was photographing things in my 20s in New York. It was just my neighborhood. It was just, but it turned out to be a pretty interesting time that at the moment just seemed like it was just life as usual. 40 years later, I realized I had no idea of the historical context of these images, and now they're in a show, and I'm putting together a book and so forth. So, to your point, a person may not think, oh, I may not be interesting or this or that. It's the opposite of being kind of too arrogant, and saying, 50. You have to find that right size. But, that person has lived through interesting times. And their experiences and their perspective on history and what's going on in their life and the life around them and at that time will be interesting to people in the future. You have no idea at that moment, but of course you have to kind of look at it from the greater perspective. So if you're recounting a story about life in 2024, may not seem interesting, but it's part of history that will become more interesting in 30, 40, 50 years or whenever. So, again, it requires kind of stepping out of our little, kind of small perspective and seeing the greater picture. And then everybody's interesting because we're all here experiencing it, and we can recount all of our experiences and opinions and perspectives have value, and if we take the time to kind of explore that and pass them on in whatever way, I think it becomes exciting and creative.
I think sometimes there's the additional hurdle. Like how do you get people that don't want to talk about themselves? How do you
Um,
get their stories? I know my parents are terrible with that. And it's not that they don't want to tell us stuff, they just don't think it's interesting at all.
yeah. If you can access sometimes letters, like in some of the research I've done, I had letters from my grandparents and this or that, and they were just kind of like, we did this, we did this, we did this. But I'm looking like, oh my God, this is amazing. And sometimes it's easier for people to say, here, I wrote this, you can read my letters, and maybe you can learn so much more, even on a personal level, from their recounting in their letters, from times past rather than have them talk about it. It's very difficult. And I know Sky does the video interviews, and I'm really big on video family chapters, kind of creating a larger family book from little, I call them little mini Ken Burns documentaries on a person. And, if you think about what Ken Burns did, he used letters, he used photos, he used different ways, and then you could even have somebody, instead of talking about what they, themselves, they could read a letter that they wrote and videotape that. That is so powerful. And, it's interesting then what it kind of sparks in that person. They may kind of recount and have memories kind of come back. A lot of legacy work is about delving into memory and using things like music or letters or ephemera to kind of dig up memories that are long kind of dug deep and that we can resurface. So the legacy research I do for myself and my family is about kind of digging up some old memories, and there's a number of ways of doing that. So it's interesting once you get people going. Even the ones who are kind of a little reluctant to kind of talk, they start to go off. They can be the ones that, okay, we're done now. We've got it.
And Peter, I also want you to just briefly talk about the digital dark, hole that we're building, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. So you talk about capturing those letters that, your parents and your great
Right.
grandparents have created, but how many people sit down and write letters to people anymore?
Yeah, I'm
So,
telling
we have even more duty and responsibility to capture our stories that don't get written down now,
you.
right?
Yeah, it's a shame.
Well,
Yeah,
I think some of them do get written down. They just get written down in a different way
On social
because,
media,
well, on social media, but not only social media. I'm thinking
email.
more of, um, like I have some texts that I've saved from my kids where I will screenshot, and usually it's something funny. And I came across one the other day where my older son on the caption I had written, I'm not going to say their names on here, but my older son taking my younger son to the dentist, and this was his, account of what happened. And it's hilarious, but it's just a screenshot of a text. And I do think that you're right. We don't sit down and write letters anymore. Well, some people I'm sure do, but most of us do not. But we can still save or look back and potentially find things like that, the text or an email. No, it's not in somebody's handwriting, but you know what? Those little emojis, my kids used to love the emojis. They actually also tell the story and just what they're saying. So I don't want to discount that. It's just a different type of letter,
Well, and
I
I've also
think.
been saving the letters that people write and include in their Christmas cards or their holiday
Mm.
cards, because that is a look back of their life in a year. And, oftentimes I'll keep that just, because they'll usually include some family photos. And, that's a little piece of their story.
Yeah. I think we have to find kind of, we just tell stories differently. We communicate differently. We communicate in a much more visual kind of medium, obviously, and I think that just kind of has to be taken into account. We can collect texts and emails and so forth. It's obviously a little bit of a more onerous task than just kind of
Yeah.
looking at a letter, but
Because there's too much of it.
there's just too much of it,
Yeah.
and how do you find it? And a lot of it's gone. A lot of my emails are, they're long gone. So once we get into that mindset of we're in a process of looking at legacy and so forth, I think we may be more prone to recognizing emails, texts, and so forth that we do want to save. In other words, yeah, it may be difficult to go back, but going forward, we still have the opportunity to kind of pull out the ones as they happen in real time and go, yeah, maybe this is interesting, so I can save it. So we can start identifying now, even if we haven't done so in the past.
Well, that's a great segue to, well, now we have all this stuff. How do you preserve it and share it?
Yeah.
What methods were you using in your process?
Well, I am, the more I do it, the more I realize like how little I've done. And I've done a lot. Uh, I'm going to show you my personal online legacy archive in a second. Um, I have I create a business plan for my business every year, or kind of re-up it. And so this year I did a legacy plan. And a legacy plan contains all the things that I want to do. And, I'm trying to be, tempered so that it's not too ambitious and doable. But like with any list, it tends to kind of go on a little too long. But it's there, and it's a roadmap for me to do it. And as we know, these are processes, not events. And so we have to be patient and understand that we're going to do the best we can and get to where we can. And there's a time limit. We all have an expiration date. A part of that is I'm getting to an age where I'm like, I better start thinking about this stuff. So I'll just give you a rundown. I'm working to create a much more comprehensive family tree. I have an auto-generated one on the Family Search website. I want to expand on that, but I also want to do a manual one because I think there's something beautiful about having a printed family tree, which you can even kind of customize. And it's not going to have everybody, but it's going to have the immediate family. So family trees and timelines are important. Timelines are amazing ways to kind of put things in perspective because memory fades. And when you start to kind of accurately put it into a timeline, it really is remarkable. It can really play tricks with what we thought happened. Anyway, photos. I have this legacy collection, which is digital. It contains photos and videos, and it photos of. It has certainly scans of older photos. It's pretty comprehensive, but as I said, not enormous number of images. And then I'm archiving prints and negatives that I think have value. The physical, the photo albums are disintegrating, but I want to create new ones, which are then reprintable, which is a good thing. I'm kind of going through my legacy plan here. The videos, to your point, Allison, I'm creating
Mhm.
like little video montages. Like I have, you know, all these videos of my son growing up, Little League, this and that, and I'm going to put it into a montage so that, he can kind of watch it without having to sit through the boring parts. And that's for him. But I'm also creating little family chapters of family members. I started with my mom, who passed away a few years. And like I said, they're little Ken Burns mini documentaries. So I interviewed her, and I think that's something that we should all do. I've been interviewing other family members, and I do it over Zoom. It may not be beautiful video, but I've got my aunt in New York, and she's telling her stories, and I have my cousin in DC, and I have them. If not the video portion, the audio portion works really well to incorporate over stills of the people that they're talking about. So, these little 10, 15, 20-minute videos about people, it'll be kind of me and my parents, my grandparents, and so forth. And then, you have like a book of video albums, really, of all those people. I think that really goes a long way, because I think they're really interesting to look at, and people, especially younger people, are more inclined to watch little film than they are to sit through kind of, stills.
Well, when you can animate someone in your
Yeah,
past,
exactly.
it's I
Yeah.
think even more special and important.
Yes. Yeah.
I've said this many times as I am digitizing some old family VHS tapes. It's running in the background while I'm doing camera scanning or something else, and I'll hear my mom laugh, and I will stop doing what I'm doing to go over there and rewatch and see her interacting with her grandchildren and enjoying the moment and laughing because she's been gone since 2011. So you don't realize how important those memories are until someone's gone.
Yeah.
So
I had,
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say I love what you just outlined as your goals, and especially as a final project that I think we would all strive to. But just to make it so that people aren't who are listening to this get completely overwhelmed, where because they are, and as soon as you show us the archive, the website that you have, I mean, these are goals. These are serious goals
Good
for
goals.
people who want to preserve. But just to keep it a little bit simpler before we dive into that is where would you tell somebody to start? What are just what's an achievable, easy goal that isn't going to overwhelm? Maybe one or two things people could do.
Yeah. Well, you want to start collecting everything, but that right away can get a little overwhelming. You could focus on one person. And I think by focusing on one person, you kind of learn your way of maybe doing things, or how you might want to, and then you make adjustments. So in other words, it's like, I'm going to do my family, that's going to be overwhelming, but I'm going to do my mom, right? I'm going to tell my mom's story. How do I tell my mom's story? How do I find the photos? Maybe I can interview my mom if she's still alive. I can look for letters and so forth. So focusing on one person gives you the opportunity to kind of make it way more manageable. And you learn as you go through that. So then, when you go on to maybe other family members, you've adjusted and taken into account, some of the things you did that you maybe would have changed. So I think just by kind of starting small with one person, I think you're really going to give yourself a lot of opportunity to kind of learn and enjoy the process, and not feel as overwhelmed. I hope that makes sense.
I do. I love that idea because I was just like, even listening to you, I was thinking, oh boy, I have so much to do.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah, I
got
think
that
starting
feeling
with one,
too.
yeah, I mean, well, that's why I wanted to just interject there. But if you break it down like that, I love the idea of just starting with one person. And that could be somebody who is accessible to you,
Yeah.
or somebody that's no longer with us, that, either way. But
Yeah.
I do love that idea. And I think it does help you get your feet wet and sort of, make it a little bit less daunting.
Yeah.
Um,
And enjoyable. It becomes enjoyable. So, and again, we've been talking about that constantly, how to turn it from being overwhelmed into, oh, this is creative, this is fun, and I can get into it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because
I'm
it
just
shouldn't be a
gonna
chore. That's what we want.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a chore. No.
And I'm just going to remind folks who may be listening in February that at the end, I think it's at the end of February or early March now, Roots Tech in Utah is a huge genealogical conference. And I went to it last year. I think this year I'll be just doing it online remotely, but it's a very inexpensive, wonderful conference for those that do want to get into understanding how to do their genealogy research on their family. So just wanted to put that out there.
And a lot of their resources are actually, you can register and get a lot of their talks and things for free. I think it's like March 3rd through 6th,
Yes.
I think. So
Yep.
Roots Tech, you just search Roots Tech 2025. You can register. And not everything is available lifetime, but a lot of it, there's a lot of good stuff. That's a really good point. Okay, so let's get back to Peter because you do have some that you are actually going to share. So we've talked a lot about the process and what you're doing and what you're finding, but
Yeah,
you had told us beforehand that you'd be willing to actually show us
sure.
what a final, or I shouldn't say final product, what a work in progress might look like.
Right.
And for those of you who are listening and not watching the YouTube channel, we will drop the link, I think, if Peter's okay with that, to
Yeah,
what he's
sure.
going to show us in our show notes. I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, Peter,
Yeah,
but
no, that's fine.
yeah.
These are public galleries.
Okay, so you can switch to our YouTube to see what he's going to show us. You can also check the links out in our show notes. So this will make a little bit more sense. But
Right.
I'm super excited to have you walk us through what you've created, a little bit of what
Okay.
you've created so far.
So I'll just preface it by saying legacy work, I think it kind of breaks down into two ways. There's the curation process, which includes collecting and storytelling and all this stuff and everything we've kind of talked about. And then there's the archiving process. And that really becomes kind of the more, a lot of questions arise around there. And I won't go into kind of technical stuff in terms of hard drives and blah, blah, blah. But one of the solutions is online personal legacy archives. And there's two that I kind of know about. One is forever.com, which is something a lot of photo managers work with and with their clients. I have started working with permanent.org, which is a nonprofit. Now, there's a lot of companies out there that, provide storage and so forth, but these are the only two that really in their mission statement talk about like, these are basically going to outlive you. So if you create an archive for you and other members, the intention is that it will outlive you. And there's the opportunity for legacy contacts and succession, which is really
Really
important.
important.
Yeah.
Yes.
Succession is about how do you pass it on when you either pass away or become too infirm. So they both provide avenues to do that. So I'm going to kind of share. I'm going to share two archives here. Let me.
And while
And
you're
both of
pulling
the
that up,
sites, both Forever and
yeah,
Permanent, allow you the option to either make it public or to keep it private or to just
Correct.
share with a select few. So you can
Yes.
choose.
Yes.
yeah.
So this is my grandfather's archive, and I did Legacy Lab, which is something permanent.org does, I think once or twice a year, where you kind of work together with other people to work to create an archive for a person. And so I chose my grandfather, who, as I mentioned, was a photographer. And it was such a great experience to do this. I learned so much about him. First of all, I always thought he was from Ukraine, and I found out he was from Minsk, which I just even love saying he was from Minsk, which is now in Belarus. And he's of Ashkenazi Jewish descent. And sorry, just looking at, I'll just start here. This is why I kind of got a little choked up.
So just to describe for people listening, we have the website up from permanent.org
Yes,
that you've created.
right. And
This one's called the Boris Lenov Archive.
yes.
Okay.
And there's two components. There's a kind of a milestone and then you can kind of write the story about him, or the person rather. I learned a lot about him. I learned something through my aunt that I interviewed, and then I went onto various websites, Family Search, and a few others, and I learned. I got documents. I'm kind of jumping around here, but let's just start with this. So I learned here's a census record that I found him and my mother and uncle and stuff, and I learned where they were living. They live mostly in Brighton Beach. I found this is another census. Then there's naturalization records. You learn, especially you get specific dates and you find out information that they have to kind of put down for some of this. So I learned here that my grandfather, he was in the Russian army, and because he was Jewish, they did not treat the Jews too well that they conscripted into the army. He had to escape through Siberia into Japan, where he then studied at a photo studio in Tokyo and learned the craft that he was able to practice. And then it says here he took a ship from, you can't see it, it's too small, from Yokohama, and it even has the name of the ship, and he landed in Seattle. And then I put together all these pieces of the puzzle, and it's just a remarkable journey that this young man took, back in 1890s, early 1900s. Really, you get inspired by these people's journey. And so I learned so much, and I had actually gone to Japan earlier this year, and I was like, how amazing would it have been to have been able to find the photo studio, if it still existed, that he worked in. You can put individual photo albums, and like here's a picture of him in Minsk with his sisters. And the reason I got a little choked up is I found out in the course of this research that they died in the camps, and that was something I had never known. And
That is
here's,
an unbelievable photograph.
isn't that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I have others too that this is still a work in progress. This is him in his Russian um, uniform, and I don't know when or where it was taken. I think it was taken in Japan after he had escaped there. And you can, you,
So you have what I find so interesting about this is we're not just looking at the photographs, but I mean, you actually have the story written out on the right-hand side there.
yes.
So it gives a lot of context. I mean, the photos are beautiful on their own, but you've given them such context.
Yeah, you can write a little bit for each photo too. So here he's in front of his photo studio. That's my mom and my uncle. This is in Brighton Beach. It's now a Russian restaurant. So you can write a little bit. You can see, maybe too small, but each individual photo allows you to write a little bit of a caption, and you can put in keywords, and you can put in capture dates if you know them. So it's the view of Brighton Beach out the
Mm.
family window. So
Your
yeah, there's a
photos are
lot of,
great.
Yeah,
yeah,
they're
these are amazing.
beautiful.
I have tons more too, which is
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
Well, so you have tons more. What percentage do you think
Well,
will end up on here?
I don't know. I'm still working on that because it is something that is survivable and I can pass on. I think photos, if you think of like the written word, a photo is like a sentence. You don't want to have too many, you don't want to have too few, so you have to kind of feel it out, so that the photos create a paragraph, and the paragraph creates a story. So too many and people lose interest, too few and people don't understand. So finding that balance, which I'm still working on. I started working with him, and then I started working on my father's, so I tend to jump around a little bit. I like doing the research on the genealogical sites and adding that in, but it's a lot of work, and you just kind of have to be patient. Um, and,
I
and
find when I do it, I go in fits and starts.
yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
you get interested in a leg or a path of your genealogy tree, and then you
Yeah,
you you realize, you log in and there's those like on Ancestry, the little green flag that says, hey, there's new
Yeah.
information. Well, then
yeah,
that's where you're off learning. I
yeah,
remember when I was researching my mother's history. She was born in Italy, and she and her mother and her brother, they took a ship to come to the US, and I was determined to figure out through the um, Ellis Island records, what the name of the ship was and the records, and I was able to find it. And I remember sending her a copy, and she's like, "Yeah, I know." Like she wasn't too thrilled or interested in her past, but it was so interesting to me to find a photo of that ship back in the 30s when she traveled. So the fact that you have so many tools now, and people, you're contributing to other people's information journey as well, as you
If
publish,
you if you want to,
if you want
yes.
to,
if you
right?
want to.
Well,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
yeah,
totally
these
up
are
to
all
you.
public galleries,
Mhm.
Yeah,
and hopefully people will find these and learn a bit of history, from the information that I've kind of compiled. What I tell people to do is to go to a free site like Family Search and source as much material, and then you can find like specific stuff on some of the more premium sites. But what I do is I subscribe for a month, and then I just
Yeah.
kind of like download as much as I want, and then I unsubscribe. And that's
Yeah.
cool. There's no reason to say subscribe to those for any extended periods because you're pretty much going to get what you need, in a short amount of time.
I
Um,
do the same. And actually, one just little tip about that is because they can be expensive. I mean,
they
Family Search
can,
is free, but Ancestry can add up. Um, but people sometimes forget that, if you unsubscribe, you don't have access anymore. So I would say I do what you do, Peter, is I go in and I download all the things, but I also keep the family tree that we're building. I don't keep that actually in those sites because I don't subscribe all the time. I actually at what I use is something called Mac Family Tree. There's a few different ones you can use to
yes.
help keep things organized. So if you do a lot of research on those sites, just keep that in mind that you may also
Yeah.
want to keep your own copy.
I'm with you totally. And if you do create a family tree on a premium site or even Family Search, you can export that. There's very specific file formats made exactly for family trees,
Yeah.
which can then be imported into the program you're using or Canva, or there's
Mhm.
quite a number of them. So that information is then transferable, and you just kind of download that file specific to family trees and then import it into whatever program you're using.
Yeah.
So yeah, totally the same.
It's amazing to me how much stuff is out there. I remember the first time that I went to Ellis Island. And at that time, I don't think you could get to any of the stuff that they have there elsewhere. Like you had to actually physically be at Ellis Island to look in their computers. And I
Um,
remember trying to look up information about great grandparents, which was literally impossible because they all changed their names when they came here. So the ship manifest and all that stuff wasn't very helpful. But today, you can just go to those sites from your
yes,
house,
yeah,
and there's so much
so much stuff.
out there. It's
Yeah.
it's just insane. In some ways it's overwhelming, but it's just incredible. And that's why I do it in fits and spurts. I get overwhelmed with it sometimes. I have
yeah,
very common names, and again, my name is made up. So by a grandfather, try searching Friedman. I mean,
Yeah.
there is so much out there, and it's
Yeah.
hard, but
My
it's also amazing because it's there. You just have to find it.
Yeah, it's tough when you come from refugee background, like many of us do. It can be hard, especially in certain places where they had to flee. There isn't the historical kind of record keeping that is then available because basically these people had to pick up and leave. So
Yeah.
you have to kind of find it scattered throughout. My last name was made up by my father
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. So a lot of the sites, as you know, allow for options. So it takes that into account. So you can search under different names and around different year periods and so forth.
And sounds like and all that.
Sounds, yeah,
Yeah.
they understand that because we all kind of, so many people do come from these
Well,
kind of
if
refugee.
you've ever seen the TV story, uh, the one with Lewis
Yes, Gates.
Gates, what is the name of that show? I watch it
Yeah,
all the time.
finding
Who do
your
you think you
roots.
are or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love how their experienced researchers can dig and find like threads of history on people and then weave this story in front of them. And I just love that. So,
Yeah.
And you can do it too. We can all do
yeah,
that
you
Yeah.
can do it too.
with practice.
Yeah. And I will
Um,
say, don't worry too much about making it, this perfect story with great verbiage, etc. I would say just focus on writing it
Capturing the
down.
stories. Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
Your writing abilities and skills will improve as you do this. So that's one of the things is you have to kind of give yourself the leeway to learn and get better and develop skills for researching, for storytelling, for archiving and all this stuff. If you just have an open mind, it's amazing how where you start and kind of where you start to progress. You really do find yourself in a different place with different skills. Um,
well, I think your collection's amazing and it's inspiring to me. And I too have taken the permanent course. It's usually in March, I believe, and but I never have enough time in March for whatever reason to like do all the homework that I need. So although I've done it twice now, I know what needs to be done. It's just a matter of, putting the time
Yeah.
aside. So
I have as well. I think I'll do it when it comes up again, and I'll kind of start in the middle because that's how I don't think they change it a lot year over year, a little bit,
yeah.
because I got through the beginning and then, life gets in the way, but I'll just restart it. It's not going anywhere.
right.
It's not a big ask, it's like a little bit of time each day, and I think it
Mhm.
gets you a little disciplined, kind of building up your legacy muscle, so to speak, and you're accountable, and you have other people to share it with. So there is
Yeah.
that, there's to show it to people. Hey, look what I did! It's fun, it's fun.
Yeah. Well,
And
yours is just truly inspiring.
well, thank you.
It's for anyone, if you're already down this, have taken this journey and you're partway through, take a look at this and you'll be inspired to keep going. If you haven't started, take a look at this and you'll be inspired. And I don't think you'll be overwhelmed because the way you've curated it so beautifully, there's not 50,000 photos on there. There's, 10.
There's
And
going
then
to
you
be
tell the
more,
story.
but yeah, there's going to be more. I've jumped around, and one of the other archives I had up there, and I just wanted to give it a quick mention because I work with professional photographers who are, their professional legacy at some point in your life becomes tied to your personal legacy because it was your life. So this is just the work I did. So, I've created an archive for that work I did in New York 40 years ago, and so that can live on. So if you have collections, if you're a photographer and you photograph something of interesting or historical or whatever, there's the opportunity to create an archive for that as well and have that shareable and findable. So I just wanted to put that out because that's something I'm working with photographers here who really, you don't want to be a Vivian Mayer whose like work is sitting around in a box discovered by somebody else. That's not going to happen to you. It only happens to very few people. So if you've developed a lifetime of work, you want to curate it and pass that on and have it available as well.
You can control your own story that way if
You
you want to.
can, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah,
great thing. That's what it's all
Yeah.
exactly.
about.
And we'll put links to all of this because you'll share it with us in the show notes so that people can see
Yeah.
and explore more. But I think we're probably at about the time to start wrapping up a little bit, although we could talk to you about this. Oh my gosh, we could keep going. But there is that course. We'll put the links to the course as well in the show notes that you teach. And we do have our final sort of signature question. Normally, it's what's the strangest photo in your collection? I think today I'd like it to be, what is the one, if you had to choose one photo I'm going to put you on the spot now because we didn't give you this in advance. But if you had to choose one photo in these archives that you have created and put out there that is the most important to you,
Hmm.
what would it be?
I think I just showed it. It's the one that always comes to mind. It's my grandfather standing in front of his photo studio with my mom
Mhm.
and my uncle. Because, to me, it's my family history, but it's my roots and how it kind of affected my life. And it has a lot of meaning to me. But I also just think it's cool, like here's a photo studio on a boardwalk. And in that archive, which I didn't get to show, people who have found my blog posts have go, your grandfather took a picture of my aunt. And here it is. And so she sends a picture of her aunt in my grandfather's photo studio with his little, kind of monogram on it.
That's
And I'm
amazing.
like, it's so cool because it just kind of, spreads. And so, yeah, that was, I guess, the
Mm,
picture that I would think of.
Yep,
I
that's
love
amazing.
that.
Yeah, you don't know how your life touches another life until you share it.
Or how your family,
Yeah,
previous
and your family.
family
Yeah.
members, that's, I think to me, the most rewarding is like when you find connections with people in the past and how your family may have impacted that. It's like, oh, that's kind of sends a little chill up my spine.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
I
Fantastic.
apologize. I've been the smoky here, and so I just kind of wanted to apologize for kind of choking a few times, but
No,
it's
it
better to
was
hear.
great. And we're so appreciative that you took the time with everything going on. Obviously, we would not have done this today with you if you were in any danger or had some place that things that you needed to have taken care of. But we are so thrilled that you were able to join us
Well,
today.
this was great. It was wonderful to have the opportunity to talk about it. And, sometimes just, I can see the work I'm doing and realize, yeah, I've probably done more than I think. And that's gratifying. And hopefully it's an inspiration to others to just start and enjoy the journey.
One
So
person at a time, like you said.
one
You
Yeah.
can't
person.
You've
swallow the
inspired
elephant.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know now. I bought one of those Ancestry subscriptions over Christmas when they were, for the next 6 months or whatever, when they were 50% off. And I admit that I have not really touched it. And now I'm like, okay, well, maybe when we're done today, I could carve out a little bit of time to
Yeah.
go in there. So you've inspired me, at least, and I am positive that you've inspired many, many more people who are going to listen to this.
Well, good, and I hope so. And there's a lot of work to do to kind of retain our history. We have a collective cultural history that we're all kind of
Mhm.
responsible for. So when we preserve our own, we add to the greater picture. And I think that's really important because that's how history is written and accessed in the future. And so we're contributing to that.
Mhm.
Nice. Thank you again, Peter.
I
This has
love
been
it. Thank you
wonderful.
so much.
And
Thank
I'm
you.
sure that our listeners will get something out of it like we have.
Well, thank
And
you very much. This was a
stay
lot of.
safe out
Yeah, we
there.
got a couple of days here with the winds, and then
Yeah.
hopefully after that, we're in the clear. So, all
Great.
right.
So what a wonderful discussion again. I am, even more motivated now to just start with someone in your family. And I think I'm going to go back and find that picture of the ship my mom was on and, talk about her.
Yeah. I think if I had to take one thing out of this, just one. I mean, there's so many interesting nuggets here, but I love the idea of just starting with one person because I've found when I do this kind of research, I just go all over the place. I find one and then, oh, there's a something, and where does that go? And then I end up on all these tangents that I kind of lose track of the real story. So I think for me, it'll be choosing one person, trying to dive in and figuring out what's happening there. And I now would prefer, I think, to go spend my afternoon, doing some research. I can't. I actually have, other work that has to get done. So I guess that's the danger of being too inspired. You still have to set by the right time to do it. But I mean, it's just incredible. And I love that his archives are public. I don't know if that's something that I would ever do. I tend to keep some of that stuff kind of close to the vest, but I love that his are public because it is inspiring to go look at it and actually see, okay, what does this look like? What is it that we're really sharing? Why are we really doing this? You can see that when you look at his sites.
Yeah. And again, you have to figure out what feels the most appropriate for your own family.
Mhm.
And there are a number of ways that we will link to. His training is awesome. We'll link to that as well. And then you just have to carve out the time and the
Yeah.
research. But one thing I just wanted to mention, which is kind of fun, and you don't realize this until you start doing your research, is that for my parents, my dad used to say that he would ride his bicycle to my mom's house when they were dating. And I thought, okay, that means he had to have lived close to where she lived. And so then I went off on a tangent to try and look at the old census records. And sure enough,
Mm.
he was only miles away from where my mom lived. And that's how he was able to, because they worked together is how they met.
Yeah.
But then to figure out where in the Detroit metro area that they lived back then was really fun, and to see those two homes and everything. And so that's
And
kind of
next,
that's
yeah.
kind of the fun part of doing your detective work and your research,
Yeah.
and
Next
so
time you're in Detroit, are you going to go look?
yeah,
Yeah.
I know where he grew up because his mother lived in that home, my grandmother's home, until she died. But I don't know if my mother's parents lived in that home. I think they moved from there. But yeah, so those are kind of fun things to go back and walk the streets that your parents or your grandparents walked
Yeah.
is fun.
I
Same
love
thing
census
to
records.
go back into
Yeah.
Europe too and do the same
Yeah.
thing if
We
they
actually,
can.
we were in Ireland a few years ago, and we went looking for my husband's family on their side, some of the old homesteads.
Oh,
And they
cool.
don't exist anymore, but the land is there. And so we're driving down all these old, these dirt roads trying to find them, and it was really cool. It
Yeah.
was really cool.
Yeah. Step back in history. Yeah.
Yep.
All
Yeah.
right.
All
Another
right.
fantastic episode. I love doing this. Thank you for being
I
on this
know, me
journey.
too. Same. This was fun. And like I said, now I have to put my head back where it should be for today, which is work, when at this point I think I'd rather, you know, start doing some other research, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Have to put a pin in it.
have to put a pin in it. Yep. So I hope everybody will go and check out the show notes. We'll have all these resources listed there. And if you were listening and not watching on YouTube, go and check out the links to what Peter was showing us, and you will be
Yeah.
inspired, I promise you.
Yeah. All right, my dear. Until next time.
Until next time.
That's it for our show today. Remember, you can find this episode on all of your favorite podcast apps. Be sure to click follow so you can stay up to date with the latest in photo organizing. We'll catch you next month.